So much for the best team money can buy. 2 years and one World Cup after hosts Qatar bought the greatest footballer of our time, Lionel Messi. He's leaving Doha-owned Paris Saint-Germain. Perhaps he's even already gone. We'll ask about his 2-week suspension for taking an unannounced late-season jaunt to 2030 World Cup candidate Saudi Arabia. We'll ask about the kingdom's bid, for which Messi is an ambassador, and whether it and the purchase of surging Newcastle sports wash away questions over human rights, the way they did for Qatar as well, whose legacy, after all the accusations of slave labor and white elephant eco-unfriendly construction, was, well, a thrilling World Cup. More broadly, how much soft power does sports buy Gulf states and American billionaires? The robber baron tycoons of the turn of the 20th century built museums and funded universities. Ultimately, does it matter how your favorite team lifted that trophy? Today, the France 24 debate. What is a Messi worth? With us, Financial Times columnist Simon Cooper, author of the bestseller Barca, The Rise and Fall of the Club That's Built Modern Football. How are you?
Good evening. Hi, Francis. Bonsoir.
Peter Rutzler is Paris correspondent for sports news website The Athletic. How are you?
Very good.
Is it The Athletic or The Athletic FC?
The Athletic, yes.
Okay. She covered the World Cup for us. France 24. Selena Sykes is here. How are you?
Francois, I'm good.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate. Lionel Messi played the full 90 minutes on Sunday of another Paris Saint-Germain counter-performance, a 3-1 home loss to mid-table Lorient. Was that the last Paris will see of the 35-year-old World Cup winning captain of Argentina? Gavin Lee has the story.
This is the story of a so-called GOAT, greatest of all time, to his millions of fans, whose fame on the pitch makes him a fortune off it. He's the face of Saudi Arabian tourism and a regular visitor, earning a reported $30 million a year to promote the kingdom. 4 days ago, he posted this Instagram update advertising the greenery of Saudi Arabia and what he called the unexpected wonders. Well, it was unexpected for Paris Saint-Germain, as it turned out he travelled there despite his club reportedly turning down his request to go so late into the football season. Now, according to a source with knowledge of the situation, Messi's suspended for 2 weeks and no pay in that time. On the face of it, just an organisation punishing an employee. But insiders say there's more to it, both for the club and the player. The 35-year-old is linked with a return to Barcelona, finishing a European career he began and a place he's idolised. With his PSG contract up in the summer, was that a factor?
I don't know. Look, I have to make a lot of decisions here, like giving an opinion about another club and another player, in this case, Leo. I don't know what happened. I don't know the situation, so I can't comment.
For Paris Saint-Germain, their €3 million a month star appears to be a fall guy for an inconsistent season made up of a galaxy of star players on astronomical salaries. He's even been jeered by fans recently. There's been no comment by the club or Lionel Messi so far.
Yeah, Paris Saint-Germain is top of the table, 5 points over Marseille, who are in second place, but even that's not clinched after they've lost out on all their other trophy hopes for this year. Peter Rutzler, what's your reaction to this story?
Well, I mean, this is a whole new level in a sort of an ongoing saga that sort of bubbled away. And I think for Paris Saint-Germain, as you mentioned, this year has been quite an about turn. I mean, you look at the end of the year, we talk about the World Cup, a PSG World Cup final with Kylian Mbappe up against Lionel Messi. And then you reach this calendar year where he comes back to the domestic football and Paris Saint-Germain's form has collapsed in respect to what they want to achieve. 9 defeats this year, more than double what they had in the entirety of 2022. And Lionel Messi, there was always this uncertainty about his future. And now we've reached a point where he's been sanctioned by the club, to almost an unprecedented level, really. A player of his calibre to be treated in this way. And now we're in a scenario where he looks set to leave. It's no way back from him at this point. And it's quite an about turn.
Fans have criticized throughout the year, not so much Messi, but more Neymar, saying the coach didn't have a handle on him, could have benched him even at times, but didn't. It's easier at PSG to sanction Messi than it is Neymar?
Well, it is. Well, I suppose it is and it isn't. I mean, this has been the story of Paris Saint-Germain in recent years. It's a club that is seen as having a dressing room with power dynamics that are very difficult to control. Christophe Galtier, the current coach, is not the first to have struggled with that dynamic. Even now, with Kylian Mbappe in the squad, a player who the club want to build around going forward, he has that influence. He is that dominant player now, the star. He's a player that becomes very difficult to discipline as well. And now we're at a point with Messi where his future is on the line. Sure, I think there is a point to say that he becomes easier to discipline. But for Paris Saint-Germain, if they want to step forward and actually become the club that they want to be domestically, to win the trophies they want to do, you need to have a power dynamic that works efficiently, that doesn't see the dressing room take hold, which is always difficult with players with the talent and also the reputation and ego that comes with it.
Simon Cooper, what does this moment in time tell you about Lionel Messi and about, well, whether you can build the best team that money can buy?
I think it tells you that Messi is not really committed to PSG, and I think he's wondering whether he still is committed to top-level club football. I think that's a decision that he's trying to make for himself. He'll be 36 next month, so does he want to go to Barcelona, which is, once again, a top European club where he would be trying to compete at the highest level, or is it over and he goes to Saudi Arabia or the US? I think he's lasted at the top longer than he'd expected. He is 36 next month, as I say, but I'm not sure that he really has any more motivation for club football, having won the World Cup. What it says about best dressing room money can buy, I'm not sure that PSG were mostly intending to buy a winning team or mostly intending to stack up trophy players. I mean, arguably Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar are the three most talented players left in top-level football. They're all at the club. And the team is very unbalanced. There's a lack of quality in other positions. The front three don't defend enough. So then they haven't really been trying to win trophies so much as to buy names.
This was a long-term effort to put Qatar on the map ahead of the World Cup. And now that the World Cup's over, it may start to disengage from PSG?
I don't think they're going to disengage. I mean, I think if another Qatari buys Manchester United, a lot of the money and the focus of the Qatari ruling elite is going to shift away from Paris, and you might see the top players being bought by United rather than by Paris. But I think it's wrong to think that regimes like Qatar and Saudi Arabia are these brilliant calculating machines, always trying to win the global power game. Remember, these are people, it's a small group of people in or close to the ruling royal families with untold billions, and you want to have some fun, and fun is having Messi or Mbappe in your football team. It's wrong always to think that they have some deeper purpose than that.
So what you're suggesting then is that Messi was worth it for Paris Saint-Germain?
Well, I think they would have preferred the great Messi rather than the rather pallid Messi. I mean, he's still, if you add up goals and assists, totaled nearly one per game, which is astonishing for anyone else, but not for Messi. So I think they will look back on it as a somewhat disappointing 2 years.
Now, both you, Simon, and Selena were at the World Cup when it opened, and one of the striking moments was this parade of world leaders that showed up to the tournament, including the Saudi crown prince. There was this feeling of a bearing of the hatchet. The fact that Lionel Messi now, Selena Sykes, has gone from Paris Saint-Germain. They had been promised that they'd have 2 days off if they won the game on Sunday. Instead, they lost. The fact that he went off to Saudi Arabia, did that rub salt in the wound for Qatar, or is bygones be bygones? It would have been an insult no matter where he went.
Well, it's like you said, it's not like he slinked off back to Argentina or somewhere else on a holiday. He did go to a regional rival, not only when it comes just to politics, but now also increasingly in the world of football. We've seen both these countries are vying for more and more influence in the world of football. They were both battling to host the Asian Cup. Doha will be hosting it this year, and Saudi Arabia in 2027. They're also both vying for the open position in the Asian Football Confederation, which will be vacant in 2027. So this is a loaded trip in any sense of the term. And, well, obviously the for Qatar. The World Cup was such a big success, but obviously I think that they will be hurt, not hurt, but Messi going to Saudi Arabia will always be a loaded trip.
And you agree with Simon Cooper? It's not necessarily about geopolitics. It could just be rich guys who want to each prove that they're the best, or they're the most powerful, or they're the smartest when it comes to buying and selling football players. When you compare Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
For sure. Sorry, I didn't know. Was that a question for me? For sure. I mean, Messi, Mbappe, it goes on and on and on. And obviously, we have Ronaldo at Saudi Arabia. Will Messi be joining him? There are rumours of that. So I think it is a question of, rich owners and rich people with lots of money seeing who they can get, really.
Simon, you're not certain that Messi will return to Barcelona. The Barcelona that you reported on for your book, is it the same one today?
Well, now they have a debt of €1.5 billion, which is about the highest debt, I think, for any sports club in any sport in history. They've also just committed to build a new stadium for about the same amount. So if you put that together, that's €3 billion that they owe. The question then becomes, will the Spanish league authorize them to offer Messi the kind of salary to which he's accustomed, or even half the salary to which he's accustomed? So when he left, he was earning about €150 million a year. Say they offered him half that, 75. Well, I'm not sure the league would authorize that. There's a complicated system of licensing in Spain. And then the question becomes for him, does he go there for a lower salary than he thinks he wants? And remember, his father is the main financial negotiator. His father fancies himself as a brilliant businessman, always trying to get the bottom dollar. When Saudi Arabia might well make him the biggest offer ever made to an individual footballer. He's transfer free when he leaves Paris. So may have to choose between playing top level football in Barcelona and making an unfeasible amount of money in Saudi Arabia.
And when it comes to Barcelona, is it a bit like Juventus or some of these other clubs where we're regularly reading headlines that, this time they're in financial dire straits, and it's true that this year they're not top of the table, but still there's this, they seem to always somehow get through it despite these threats of financial fair play being enforced?
Well, they have been allowed to spend a huge amount of money assembling an excellent new team, which is going to win the Spanish league this year. And so it seems, in a sense, that the €1.5 billion in debt has been forgotten. That's history. It will probably never entirely be paid back. And they're already sort of mortgaging their revenues mortgaging future revenues to bring in more money now. And yeah, it's as if they have been allowed to go unpunished for it. But then bringing in Messi, who probably after Mbappe would be the highest paid player in football, in European football, that might be a step too far for them to be able to go at this point.
Peter Rutzler, when you look back on it, Qatar coveting Paris Saint-Germain, with hindsight, why did they do it?
I think we've outlined that point quite clearly. I think for Qatar, it's about stepping onto that stage. It's about the profile that it brings. We're talking about Paris Saint-Germain, we're talking about Qatar, and I think what that fundamentally underlines much of the past decade, really, under the QSI era, is that project. Sure, there is that sporting element, there is that direction, there is, as Simon was saying, the desire to do something you would enjoy, but also it's on a stage. The stories of Neymar, the story of Messi, people follow those. It attracts an audience, it attracts a broader spectrum of people. And in that sense, yes, I think there is this desire to be seen, and this drama, again, fits into that sort of, that playbook, that direction. And I suppose the question now, when you're looking forward about what's next for the PSG project, will depend. Will there be that sale to another Qatari of Manchester United? Will that change what they do with Paris Saint-Germain? Will that dictate a more sporting, potentially, focus, which seems to be the noises. The noise seems to be, this is a line in the sand, this is a moment where, it's not about big names anymore, it's about the sporting project. But that's been said before. Are
you, as a sports writer, happy that the matches are competitive, or scratching your head because Paris Saint-Germain is not running away with it?
Competitiveness is the big topic, and I think particularly when you have clubs that are bankrolled by states, you will get this stretching out of the sporting spectrum. You will get scenarios where, as we saw with the links to a breakaway Super League, you get this scenario where you lose competitiveness, and it's one of the big fundamental questions within European football. You know, in Ligue 1, Paris Saint-Germain have dominated French football for most of the past decade because of that financial advantage. Yet in Europe, they're able to compete, and the question for them is, do they want to compete then with only those clubs? It's quite an existential question, really, for the game in itself, when you siphon off money into a select group like that, and where the next direction goes will be important, because we look at the Ligue 1 table, sure, there's a 5-point gap, but PSG have the quality of player that is just that one step above the rest in Ligue 1, and unless you can get that redistribution, you will end up with leagues that lose their competitiveness and then lose eyeballs on them as well.
Yeah, Celine was pointing out earlier that we come to the end of a cycle with that World Cup that concluded in November, and now we're looking ahead to other competitions, and the World Cup could return to the Gulf in 2030. Saudi Arabia among the nations bidding for the tournament, not alone, part of a joint bid. Here you see the other contenders. These would be joint bids, one for South America, the other between Portugal, Morocco, and Spain. And yeah, Egypt, Greece, and Saudi Arabia. Back in February, Politico reported that there were calls last summer between the Greek Prime Minister and the Saudi Crown Prince, that the joint bid with Egypt then came to fruition, with Saudi Arabia prepared to fully underwrite the costs. But 75% of the huge 48-team tournament itself would be held in the Gulf state. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, who cares how your owners made their money when you can all but seal a Champions League spot for next season? Newcastle go into their weekend home match against Arsenal in third place, when just a few seasons ago they were flirting with relegation. Selena Sykes, we're seeing that the fans of the Magpies there sporting Saudi attire in the stands. They don't care about sports washing.
I think you're right. You're 100% right. I saw my own club, Chelsea, have the same thing happen to them. You know, when I was a kid, we were 4th, 5th at best, and they were also transformed by Roman Abramovich's money, and we're seeing it with Newcastle, we're seeing it with Manchester City. I think fans, most fans won't ask the questions, or they will assume that their governments will have done the checks and asked the questions themselves. And I think, like we saw in Qatar, there was so much noise before the World Cup about all the controversy, about the workers' rights. But as soon as the ball was kicked, as we predicted, the focus was on the sport and the spectacle of the sport. And that's really the crux of the issue. Most of these issues are often forgotten or put on hold, or, you know, especially forgotten by fans when success is had.
Yeah, and Simon Cooper, success is that of the clubs we've mentioned. It's also the success of their Premier League in this era of mergers and acquisitions we live in. It seems as though English football is sucking the oxygen from the other big leagues in Europe. All the attention is on England.
Well, not all. I mean, there's a few clubs. So there isn't much international interest in the Bundesliga, say, or even in most of the Spanish league. But the world is interested in Real Madrid, Barcelona to a lesser degree, and Bayern München and Paris Saint-Germain. So there's a few giant clubs in Europe that continue to hold out. But you suddenly see with the Super League that the clubs that still wanted are Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus. And it's partly because they have somewhat lost interest in their domestic leagues. Whereas for the English clubs, they're very happy in the Premier League. For them, that is the Super League. So you have this kind of contradictory interest between the English clubs on the one hand, for whom Europe is very much the secondary stage, and a club like Real Madrid, which sees itself as a European more than a Spanish club.
Have owners of football clubs always been these sort of, I don't know, philanthropists or benefactors who come with a big pot of money? Or were there different kinds of profiles of club ownership in England?
There's broadly two kinds of club owners say, in the last 30 years. One is the kind who wants to make a profit, and the Glazers and Manchester United are an example of that. Manchester United and Arsenal are among the very, very few European clubs that are consistently profitable. So if you own them, you can actually make a profit. But the larger type is the owner who's more after glory. So Roman Abramovich, mentioned by Selina, is an example of that. The Saudis at Newcastle. Their clubs will lose money. It's not a big deal. You might make that money back when you sell the club to, another glory hunter when you leave, and then everything is fine. But anyway, you have a great ride. You're a billionaire. What more do you want from life than to own a big club and invite your friends over and be on television and pose with celebrities and so on? So the glory hunters will tend to win more prizes than the profit seekers like the Glazers, because the glory hunters pour money into football, whereas the Glazers are taking money out of their clubs, so they have less to spend on top players.
Yeah, and in the case of Newcastle, The Athletic reported earlier this month on leaked emails that showed that Saudi Arabia's sporting ambitions became something of a question of nation-state relations for Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, Peter Rutzler.
Yes, absolutely. My colleague Adam Crafton was all over that story, and it underlines the role that sport can play beyond just what the supporter and the typical fan engages with. The level of investment now. The Premier League in itself is one of the biggest and one of the best exports from the United Kingdom these days. So for the country to have an asset like that, it plays a role in its international relations. It plays a role in its negotiations, in its trading, and a part of that will stem from what it can do with these states and their agreements with them.
And Saudi Arabia, why now? Why this push now?
Well, with Saudi Arabia, you have the Vision 2030. This is the goal of the state, really, to modernize, to diversify its wealth background. And fundamentally, that involves many different sectors, investments in many different sectors, and sport is seen as a key part of that. And that plays back into the point we were talking about before in terms of the 2030 World Cup, wanting that to be the stage, to have its moment in the sun in the same way that Qatar did in December.
And Selina, of course, it's after the 2018 murder of Jamal Khashoggi. There was after the ostracization of their young crown prince. There's been something of a seduction tour on the part of the regime there.
For sure, they are. They're doing event after event. They're hosting the 2023 FIFA World Cup this year. They're hosting the Asian Games. There are reports that they might even launch a 2020 cricket tournament. So there is very much a long-lasting courtship. They've obviously had the Formula One since 2021. So that it's not just football. It's really they're very much scouting out sport and opportunities for soft power throughout many different sports as well.
Yeah, different sports. Lionel Messi's 35. 3 years his senior, Cristiano Ronaldo, has been rewarded with deals and contracts in Saudi Arabia, where he's now practicing his craft. It makes him the richest athlete in the world for 2022, topping the list compiled by Forbes. And 3 of the top 10 earn their money in large part thanks to Saudi Arabia. Golfers Dustin Johnson and Phil Mickelson also making that top 10 list. They're part of the Saudi-backed, Donald Trump-endorsed breakaway Live Golf circuit. Simon Cooper, your thoughts on that? Why did Saudi Arabia go all in for golf as well?
I think there's also just a big part of vanity. I mean, MBS seems to have narcissistic traits, delusions of grandeur. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, who now rules Saudi Arabia more or less single-handed. I don't think sport is a great place to make a lot of money. So I don't think they're going to make money out of owning Newcastle or owning the golf tour or maybe hosting the World Cup. I don't even think indirectly. I never envisage a future that, even though they talk about it, where Saudi Arabia is going to be a tourist destination. I mean, come on. If you want to have sun, sand and beaches, go to Spain. And I think it's very, very unlikely that this push will ever work. I think it's more a way to kind of express a personal desire for grandeur and to be seen on the world stage by this man. It wasn't a desire that Saudi Arabia ever particularly had before. And if you want to diversify out of oil, well, why not invest in, productive industries in other countries? I mean, they do invest a bit in American tech. That seems to me a much better way of going about it than branding Saudi Arabia as a sports tourism destination. Sports is almost never a way to make money unless you are an athlete yourself.
Unless you're an athlete, or unless you run FIFA. Only 2 women in that top 50, Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams, who've since retired, as female footballers demand equal pay from their national sides ahead of the Women's World Cup. FIFA has been quick to pick up on the argument this week, threatening a TV blackout for European broadcasters.
Broadcasters, especially public broadcasters funded by taxpayers' money, should put their action behind their words, because they rightfully criticize football organizations or other sports organizations for not paying equally women and men.
It's interesting because Selena Sykes, there's a Saudi connection there as well in the organization of this Women's World Cup. Your reaction to what you heard there from Gianni Infantino?
Well, yeah, first, the Saudi connection is that Saudi Arabia was supposed to be an official sponsor for the upcoming Women's World Cup, but there was such a fierce backlash that Gianni Infantino rarely stepped down, admitting defeat over the contracts. They will not be sponsoring the Women's World Cup this year. In regards to this broadcasting rights row with Europe, this is regarding the 5 arguably biggest footballing nations in the continent. That's the UK, Spain, Italy, France and Germany, who have, according to FIFA, not offered enough money to broadcast the Women's World Cup this summer. Why has this come about now? Because they were bundled before the Men's and the Women's World Cup. So many people in the women's game will say that it's FIFA in the past who've been undervaluing and maybe using some inflating money in the men's game, and now that these broadcasters are having to pay separately, that this is causing issues as well. Though they do probably have some argument to be had, because the sums of money are really astronomically different.
And you're getting here to the heart of the matter of what we've been discussing this whole hour. We've been talking about how much Lionel Messi is worth. We've been talking about whether or not running a football club is profitable or not. But in the eyes of the public, football is something of a public service, and FIFA is its United Nations.
For sure. I mean, football has to be. Public broadcasters have to show the World Cup, and FIFA know how much power the game holds. It's definitely changed a lot in the last 20 years. There's so much money in it now. It's astronomically, it's eye-watering, the figures that we're seeing now in the world of football, and that now goes hand to hand. The football, football and politics aren't separate. I mean, I'd love in an ideal world to say that sports and politics should be separated, but that's just not the era we live in right now. It's not the world we live in.
Peter Rutzler, the perception of what is football and the reality, how different is it when we're having this discussion? The way Gianni Infantino says, well, you have to pay us more money because otherwise you're discriminating against women.
I think there's an ideal of what football is and what football wants to be and what it purports to be and what it exists in, the real world, the reality of it. And for sure, FIFA may want to be this United Nations. They have a role, a responsibility to protect the game, to further the game across the world. But at the same time, they're at the whims of the states who will want to use it for their own interests, for their own influences. And then you will get FIFA wanting to take a leader. Can it be step the other way? Can it therefore try and influence global politics? You can host a World Cup potentially in Russia one year, and perhaps then the United States in 2022, which is potentially what Sepp Blatter envisioned. And when this is the I think the real quandary with FIFA is holding those to account in a way that United Nations is comprised of states. FIFA doesn't work like that, and that's, for me anyway.
So you're saying FIFA wishes it was the United Nations?
I don't think FIFA doesn't. It wishes to do whatever it wants to do, but I think for FIFA, it wants to have that leading role, and it depends on the characters who take control of it, those who lead it, who want to take the organisation forward, take the sport forward, to make it that idealistic thing that, you know, it will bring warring factions together, it will bring people together, and sometimes that's the idealism, that's what makes it difficult, and it can be a lofty ambition, but actually putting that into practice is something else.
Simon Cooper, does FIFA want to bring peace on earth, or does it just want to make a lot of money?
It just wants to make a lot of money. And it wants to make money for FIFA, because the World Cup, the Men's World Cup, is really the only profit-making instrument that FIFA has. All its other tournaments, including so far the women's, although the women's viewing figures have been going up, the Women's World Cup could become profitable for FIFA. But for now, the Men's World Cup is really its money machine every 4 years, and that's why they've increased the number of teams in the World Cup to 48 next time. That's why they talked about having a World Cup every 2 years, which nobody else in football wanted. So they just spend all day thinking about how can we maximize incomes, especially from the Men's World Cup.
And at this particular point in time, the perception of football, is it the same as when you began, Simon, as a journalist?
I think the game was much more naive then. It hadn't quite realized how lucrative it could be. I mean, I began writing about football in 1986. A year before, there had been for a while no league football on English television. Imagine that. So, you know, the top scorer in the English First Division, Frank McAvenny, a year before, could walk around London unrecognized because nobody watched football. And very few television companies were paying any significant amounts of money for football anywhere on earth. And then Berlusconi and Murdoch came in and set up pay TV channels that were kind of based around selling football. And that's when, in the early 90s, the money began streaming in. And that's when you get a lot of people going into work in football at FIFA and at clubs thinking, right, there are revenue streams we can tap. Let's go about doing this. I mean, before it was a really kind of tin pot, amateurish setup.
But a tin pot amateurish setup, and now it's no longer the case in the way, especially thanks to that broadcast revenue, and we were just talking about it a moment ago, and you can follow things in real time, and everybody again wants to be a benefactor. Benefactors with deep pockets come in all shapes and sizes. For instance, Dateline, the former coal mining town of Wrexham in North Wales, it's newly promoted to League Two. That's the equivalent of Division 4, a return to professional football made possible by two American actors, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney.
Well, we've been stuck in this league for 15 years. So we've had 15 not very good. No, we got to the playoff final a few times, well, playoffs. But it's still been all right. It's still good. You know, you still support Wrexham, but now everything's on the up and just brilliant times.
What do you make of Johnny Boycott's view there that, look, these Americans coming in from abroad, it's great. We're promoted.
It's a feel-good story in a way that isn't always the case, I think. And I think what Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds have done is built from the community, taken the community with them, which isn't always the case with these takeovers, you know.
Yeah, because wasn't there, I think it was at Manchester United, there was this attempt to when the Glazers bought the club, to have another team that would be fan-based and would be more authentic?
FC United of Manchester, yes. So an offshoot club that would feel more connected to the fans and we fundamentally are the game, so to speak. And it's this idea that the Glazers, you know, bought Manchester United for their own ends. It was a leveraged buyout. And that's, you know, now we're seeing the reality of supporters wanting them gone today with the takeover. But I think with Wrexham, it's a story where, yes, there has been a wealth injection. Yes, that has helped them to really dominate the division. Notts County aside, they've done a fantastic job staying with them. But what has appealed is that it's gone with the supporters. It's transformed the town. It's for the better generally, you know. And that kind of positivity is not always common with these kind of takeovers. And for sure, they get something out of it as well with the documentary. You know, there's always something you take with it, but the success of that has certainly made a difference.
Simon Cooper, globalization can be a force for good in football?
globalization can be a force for good, a force for bad, a force for both at the same time in all sorts of realms, and every realm from kind of immigrations, terrorism, global culture to war. Everything is globalized. You can no longer say it's good or bad. It's just the era we live in, and despite people like Trump talking about rolling it back, I haven't seen that happen.
And in the case of Wrexham, what does that story tell you?
One of the basic stories of football is Cinderella. And nowadays, Cinderella is enabled by, not by the prince, but by, let's say, foreign princes coming in with money. And so Wrexham is the latest Cinderella story. In 100 years from now, there will still be Cinderella stories in football. They might arrive by different mechanisms. Football tends to very much be driven by money, as the source of everything in football is money.
But money can't buy you. You're the one, by the way, Selena, who brought up Chelsea, not
I knew you
me.
were going to come to me on that.
They lost to Arsenal last night, and they looked absent during the first half. This is a team that paid more in the winter transfer market, I believe, than all the transfer money that was paid in the other 4 leagues combined.
I mean, it just goes to show there are exceptions to the rule. Money doesn't buy everything. Obviously, I say this as our success for the past 20 years before this season has been down to foreign investment and Roman Abramovich. So it's not just that. I would say it's not just about the money. It's also about the vision that the owner has when they come to a club. We've seen that with many clubs. Money does matter, but it has to be spent intelligently. And I would say that we've seen maybe at PSG and at Chelsea that it's not always spent intelligently. We'll have to see next season. I think mathematically it's still possible that Chelsea can even be relegated if we carry on losing, Francois.
Buying players from to bring in a whole set of new players has its drawbacks. It's still a sport where it's better if you tap into your own farm system.
Well, in a sense, yeah. And I mean, I guess it's lost. I mean, today the transfer window is massive, isn't it? It's what everyone talks about. It's the rumours. It's a world of its own. It's a business of its own. And I think that can be a draw. And the excitement of it, particularly if you're an owner and you're new to it, that can be really appealing. But the fundamentals of a transfer, you're moving a human being. And if you're moving a human being to a new environment, there are so many different variables that will dictate whether that transfer will be a success. It could be his family. It could be a new language, it could be a new home, there are so many different factors, and often that can be overlooked. And if you do, like we've seen with Chelsea, with the investment they've put so many new bodies in a new place, having to build new friendships, new understandings, new ways of playing, new coaches, that's a lot of change in a short amount of time, and to expect success instantly, it doesn't work like that. And I think that does often get lost because we have this thirst for transfer and the news and the big spending.
Simon Cooper, is it still possible in the 21st century to have a winning team that feeds largely on its youth players coming through the system?
What has been done in the 21st century, and Barcelona produced possibly the best team that any one of us have ever seen around 2008, 2012, with most of the players very much coming out of their own academy, the Masia. Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, Piqué, Busquets, chief among them. It's probably not possible to do quite that again, but certainly you could have teams like Paris Saint-Germain, which is in the biggest talent pool in the world, Greater Paris, biggest talent pool in global football. They could have a team where you could get 6 or 7 great players from the region. It can be done, but even if you do that, you still have to spend an enormous amount of money on their salaries. Because, I mean, Stefan Szymanski and I showed in Soccernomics that the correlation between salaries and league position is extreme. So pretty much the team with the highest salaries finishes first, the team with the lowest salaries finishes last. The reason why Barcelona were so good is not just that they produced these players, they then had to pay the world-beating salaries to keep them all there.
And Peter Rutzler, will it be a little bit less exciting to go to the stadium when Lionel Messi is no longer at Paris Saint-Germain? This is your first year covering PSG.
It is, yes. I mean, I don't know whether it'd be more exciting. I mean, a lot depends on the results, and I think if we see more performances like we saw at home to Lorient at the weekend, yeah, I don't think it makes too much of a difference from a footballing perspective in terms of the excitement. But this is it. You know, Messi is a draw. Paris, the Parc des Princes is full of obviously supporters, but those who have come to see Messi, and that will change for sure.
Selena Sykes, a final thought on this? On
PSG or
on PSG and PSG after Lionel Messi?
Honestly, I mean, it's been quite a lackluster. I mean, has it been? It's quite a lackluster 2 years in general. I think he might be a bit of a scapegoat now for their season and their drop in form. A lot of fans, when he was coming back from the World Cup, was saying that he was just going to, you know, be on cruise control for the rest of the season. And there's talk now about PSG obviously kind of changing tact and being more focused on youth players and youthful talent rather than buying big names. We'll have to see whether that is the case or not.
Yeah, because the list is long of players groomed at Paris Saint-Germain who practice their craft elsewhere. Selena Sykes, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank as well Peter Rutzler, Simon Cooper for joining us as well. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.